What's up, family? This is Juan J coming at you for a real talk commentary. Again, I promise to come back to you and deal with that penal code that we dealt with on last week. Um, it's good to see you. I am going over again the penal code. I am recommending that everybody get this book, The American Slave Code in Theory and Practice. Again, the American Slave Code in Theory and in Practice. Let me say this again. I think that every Black American, every Native African American, every European American, every Asian American, every Latino American, every African American from the diaspora, every Irish American, every Italian American, if you claim to be American and you say that you are an American, I think that you need to purchase this book, The American Slave Code in Theory and in Practice. I know the book is like backwards, but so I'm gonna keep this up here for just a hot second, because I think that if you say that you are an American and you have no knowledge of the American Slave Code, the most strenuous, terrible, horrible code in the history of creation, far worse than anything in your Bible, your Quran, your Torah, or any books of any religious persuasion. You need to get it. This book right here, The American Slave Code, in Theory and in Practice. Let me tell you how profound this book is, and how powerful this book is, and how dastardly this book is, and how precise this book is, and how accurate this book is, and how clear this book is, and how convincing this book is. This book is so bad, but so good, but so humbling, that they didn't even teach this to us in grade school, middle school, high school, and not even in college. I just wonder sometimes, what would the Native African American community be like if they knew about the American Slave Code? I wonder how would we respond? How would even our European brothers respond if they knew their ancestors, those loved, cherished ancestors from George to Jefferson, to Jackson, to Franklin, to Adams, to Lincoln, all of them with no exception, even up to the present day, the Wilsons, the Eisenhowers, the Roosevelts. They all knew about the American Slave Code in theory and in practice, and they implemented it, and they enforced it. And we are, what you're seeing right now, are the product of the American Slave Code in theory and in practice. A lot of our behaviors are straight out this book. A lot of things that we do that we can't explain, it comes straight out this book. Last week, I read the title in this book on the chapter that says that Black people are subjection to all white persons, not just their masters, that they ought to be subjected, to submit to not just their masters, to all white people. That's on page 283, chapter 4. Submission is required of all slaves, not to the will of the master only, but to the will of all white people. You need to see this. You have to read this book to really understand, why do people do what they do? Why do our white brethren do what he does? And why do black people instinctively do what we do? Because I'm connecting the dots, people, that what we do is embedded in us. Again, we read the Ten Commandments and talking about thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, thy neighbor's ass, thy neighbor's goods. We know these 10 commandments like the back of my hands, and they are embedded in our souls. They're in our hearts. So we just do it automatically. You know what's wrong. But we have never been taught about the slave code. But it's in our DNA because it's been passed down through us seminally through our DNA. The fear of the slave code was passed down through us seminally from our great grandmothers and fathers. You wonder why we whisper so much when they're around? It was passed down through us to the DNA. Why we won't respond, why we won't rebel, why we won't resist, why we won't revolt. Because the slave code was passed down through us in our DNA. I mean, it's at a molecular, at a molecule level, at a biological level. I mean, it's just that deep. I've asked ministers, have you ever heard of a slave code? Nah, what's that? But they know the 10 Commandments. Even my black nationalists, we talk about the Book of the Dead. Or we talk about the book of coming day by the book of coming day by night, coming forth by day and night. And we can quote all the books, all the laws. And that's good. But we never deal with this code of why we do what we do. And again, as I read last week, which I thought was a very key point, because I think that we need to know that our forefathers, our ancestors, was subjected to every white person, not just their masters. Can you imagine a 5-year-old child telling a grown 35-year-old black male or a 70-year-old black male what to do? And if he didn't do it, he'd be whooped with at least 29 lashes for disobeying any random white child. Again, submission is required to the slave, not to the will of the master only, but to the will of all white persons. The slave codes. So if you want to see what I said last week, go to YouTube or go to my page and put up the video and you'll see it. But I'm going to move on to another chapter in the book because, again, I was instructed just to read and just explained. So this next chapter, maybe it's chapter 6, it says, education is prohibited. So we dealt with you are to submit to every white person that you see. Any white person that you see back in those 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, 1500s. Everyone you see. And now I'm dealing with education. It says, the slave, not being regarded as a member of society, nor as a human being, the government, instead of providing for his education, takes care to forbid it as being inconsistent with the conditions of chattelhood. Say that again. The slave, not being regarded as a member of society, nor as a human being. They didn't regard us as members of society, nor as human beings. The government, instead of providing for his education, slaves take care to forbid it as being inconsistent with the conditions of chattelhood. Let me keep reading. Chattel are not educated. And if humans beings are to be held in chattelhood, education must be withheld from them. Read it again. Chattel are not educated. And if human beings are to be held in chattelhood, education must be withheld from them. Let me say something. We've had this civil rights campaign in the 60s, 70s. We're just out of civil rights, maybe 50 years. They, on record, gave us freedom in 1800s. Prior to the 1800s, we're like maybe 200-300 years forbidden to be educated. That's deep. That's why when these ministers come at me with this, they appear to be the authority on the scriptures. And we've only been reading for maybe 150 years, maybe 100 years. We've actually been allowed to read. But they are the authority on the scriptures. What we are as black people, we're the authority on kindness. We're the authority on love. We're the authority on grace. We're the authority on, being submissive and being passive. But on interpretation of the scriptures, no, we're not the authority. We still suffer from colonial Christianity and plantation preaching. And I'm doing everything in my power to expose colonial Christianity and black plantation preaching. Because I'm going to let you know that he, the Yeshua, whether you believe him or not, was a revolutionary. Period. Back to my reading. South Carolina Act of 1740. The South Carolina Act of 1740, whereas the having slaves taught to read or suffering them to be employed in writing may be attended with great inconvenience, be it enacted that all and every person and persons whatsoever who shall hereafter teach or cause any slave or slaves to be taught to write shall use or employ any slave as a scribe in any manner of writing whatsoever, hereafter taught to write, every such person or persons shall for every such offense forfeit the sum of 100 pound currency. That's in Breviary Digest, page 243, Georgia similar. 20 penalty 20 pounds. Read it again. This was the South Carolina Act of 1740. The South Carolina Act of 1740 says, whereas having slaves taught to write, you were having slaves taught to write, or suffering them to be employed in writing. So you are working with them how to write, and you employ them to write, may be attended with great inconveniences, be it enacted that all and every person and persons whatsoever who shall thereafter teach, or cause any slave or slaves to be taught to write, or shall use or employ any slave as a scribe in any manner of writing whatsoever, hereafter taught to write, every such person or person shall for every such offense forfeit the sum of 100 pounds currency. If you decided to teach or have your slave to write or subscribe, you had to give up 100 pounds currency. And that's in the Georgia similar, Reader's Digest, page 243. South Carolina, another act of 1800, that assemblies of slaves, free Negroes, mulattoes, whether composed of all or any such description of persons, or of all or any of the same, or of a portion of white persons, meet together for the purpose of mental instructions in a confined or secret place, or declared to be unlawful meeting, and magistrates are hereby required to enter such confined places and break doors, if resisted, and to disperse such slave, free Negroes, and officers dispersing such unlawful assemblies may inflict such corporal punishment, not exceeding 20 lashes upon such slaves, free Negroes, as they may judge necessary for deterring them from such unlawful assemblies in the future. Did you hear me? Did you hear that? Everything I'm reading happened to your great grandmother, grandfather, uncle, great uncle, great cousin. I'm gonna read that again, because I was instructed just to read. South Carolina, the Act of 1800, that assemblies of slaves, free Negroes, mulattoes, whether composed of all or any such description of persons, of all or any of the same in the portion of white persons, meet together for the purposes of mental instructions, not physical, mental, in a confined or secret place, or declared to be unlawful meetings. Black people could not meet for education nowhere. It was unlawful. And the magistrates, the judges, the magistrates, are hereby required to enter such confined places and break down the doors, and if resisted, and to disperse such slaves and free Negroes, and the officers dispersing such lawful assembly may inflict such corporal punishment, not exceeding 20 lashes upon each such slaves, free Negroes, as they may judge necessary for deterring them from such unlawful assemblies in the future. We're talking about free, we're talking about slave, black people being forbidden to read or to write for hundreds of years. And if they was caught reading and writing, they were to implement corporal punishment upon them. Corporal punishment, okay? That it shall not be lawful for any number of slaves, free Negroes, mulattoes, even in company with white persons, to meet together for the purpose of mental instructions, either before the rising of the sun or after the going down of the same. From the rising of the sun to the going down of the same, you, my forefathers, your forefathers, were not allowed to read or write. And if caught reading or writing in a group, they would be whooped with corporal punishment, no more than 20 lashes. That's in Brewer's Digest, page 254. Okay? Now, Virginia had a law. Virginia revised the code of 1819 that all meetings of assemblies of slaves or free Negroes or mulattoes mixing and associating with slaves at any meeting, house or houses, in the night, or at any school or schools teaching them reading or writing, either in the day or night, under whatsoever pretense, shall be deemed and considered an unlawful assembly, and any justice of a country wherein such assembly shall be either from his own knowledge or the information of others, of such unlawful assembly may issue his warrant, directed to any sworn officer or officers, authorizing him or them to enter their house or houses where such unlawful assembly takes place, may be for the purposes of apprehending or dispersing such slaves, and to inflict corporal punishment on the offender or offenders at the discretion of any justice of the peace, not exceeding 20 lashes. 1 Revised Code 424-5, Virginia. These are the penal codes that our forefathers were under. I'm going to again lift the book up again. And I want you to get it. The American Slave Code in theory and in practice. I am reading to you what America has done to our forefathers, our ancestors, and still do today in their heart. In their heart. Okay? Forbidding our ancestors to read or to assemble together to read. And if caught, corporal punishment must be issued upon them. Man, that's deep. I'm just going to keep on reading. Because I need you to know just what we are dealing with. The levels of wickedness. These codes was never instituted in the history of the world upon no group of people, not even in the scriptures, whether it's the Quran or the Bible or the Torah. These slave codes came out of the hearts and the minds of so-called saved, born again, white male Christians who said they believed in Jesus. These were so-called good, born again, white males who convinced a nation of white people, not just white, the Spaniards, the Portugals, the popes, the bishops, convinced generation after generation after generation after generation. They enforced these laws on my ancestors and yours. And when I keep telling you that I refuse to never forget, because we haven't dealt with this issue. We all have our instructions. And my instructions is to bring this information to you, and you govern yourself accordingly. You do the research, and you pass this on to our generation. Because our generation is looking for answers, and the younger generation is looking for answers. Why do we do what we do? We can't explain why we do what we do, but we do it instinctively because the penal codes is in us instinctively. instinctively. We do things instinctively because it's embedded in us. It's passed down through our DNA at a secular level. At a secular level. Okay? We keep reading. Virginia Revised Code of 1819. The Virginia Revised Code of 1819. Did I read it already? I think I read that. No, I didn't. Okay, let me. I think I read that. Beside the state laws, the corporate towns and cities frequently have ordinances on the subject. For example, in Savannah in 1818, public journals announced as follows: the city has passed an ordinance by which any person that teaches any person of color, slave or free, to read or write, or cause such persons to be so taught, is subjected to a fine of $30 for each offense. And every person of color who shall keep a school to teach writing, reading, is subject to a fine of $30 or to be imprisoned 10 days and whipped 39 lashes. The code. The code that we was under for hundreds of years. Should I read it again? Beside the state law, the corporate towns and cities frequently have ordinances on the subject. For example, in Savannah in 1818, this is 2018, 1818, 1918, that's almost 300 years. Wow, almost 300 years. 1818, 1918, 2018. This is 2018. Wow. The city has passed an ordinance by which any person that teaches any person of color, slave or free, to read or write, or cause such persons to be so taught, is subjected to a fine of $30 for each offense. $30 was a lot of money back in 1818. $30 was equivalent to maybe like $3,000 in today's currency, okay? And every person of color who shall keep a school to teach reading or writing is subject to a fine of $30. Where was a slave going to get $30 from? Or to be imprisoned 10 days and whipped 39 lashes. In North Carolina, to teach a slave to read or write or sell or give him any book, Bible not exempt, or pamphlet, is punished with 39 lashes or imprisonment if the offender be a free Negro, but if a white, then with a fine of $200. Read it again. In North Carolina, to teach a slave to read or write, or sell or give him any book, Bible not exempted, or pamphlet, is punished with 39 lashes or imprisonment if the offender be a free Negro. But if white, then with a fine of $200. The reason for this law, assigned in its preamble, is that teaching slaves to read and write tends to dissatisfaction. Say this again. The reason for this law, assigned in its preamble, is that teaching slaves to read and write tends to dissatisfaction in their minds and to produce insurrection and rebellion. They knew back then in 1818 white male dominant culture knew back in 1818, if you taught the slave to read and write, he will rebel against you. You will see insurrections. You will see dissatisfaction. So don't teach your slave to read or write. Keep him docile. Keep him unlearned. Okay? You can read that in Jay's Inquiry, page 136. This was enacted in 1831. Vide Child's Appeal. In Georgia, I'm just reading. If a white teach a free Negro or slave to write, he is fined $500 and imprisoned at the discretion of the court. If the offender be a colored man, bond or free, he may be fined or whipped at the discretion of the court. Of course, a father may be flogged for teaching his own child. This barbarous law was enacted in 1829. I'm going to keep showing the book because I want every Native African American and every viewer in the world, whether you're in Africa, Brazil, South America, it don't make a difference. Wherever this video goes, I need you to get this book, The American Slave Trade, The American Slave Code in Theory and in Practice, and read it. It's going to answer so many of your questions as to why we do what we do and why our Caucasian brothers still act the way he acts. These laws are embedded on his heart. And he may not be able to quote to you the amendments, the statutes, but his actions are telling you, his actions, their actions are telling me that they are still functioning under the penal code today. Okay? Let me keep on reading. In Louisiana, the penalty for teaching slaves to read and write is 1 year's imprisonment. That's in Louisiana. In Louisiana, the penalty for teaching slaves to read or write is 1 year. Okay? The following statement will be regarded with interest as being from one of the highest legal authorities. In Georgia, by Act of 1829. Hey, Mona, I believe I saw you the other day at the range. Were you at the range the other day last week? I think I saw you at the range. But I'm not going to stop what I'm doing. But I think I saw you at the range. I'm back. You and Poe. Okay, I'm back. The following statement will be regarded with interest as being from one of the highest legal authorities. Okay? In Georgia, by Act of 1829, no person is permitted to teach a slave, Negro, or free persons of color to read or write. So in Virginia, by statute in 1830, I knew that was you, but I was just too preoccupied, too busy. But we'll talk. And I hope you did good when you were shooting too. You know I'm an instructor. I know Kevin, he's a good shooter, but he's not an instructor. You need to give me a holler. I'll teach you how to shoot better than he will. I promise you that. So in Virginia, by statute in 1830, let me get it right. So in Virginia, by statute in 1830, meeting of free Negroes to learn reading and writing are unlawful, and subject them to corporal punishment. And it is unlawful for white persons to assemble with free Negroes or slaves to teach them to read or write. Do you hear me, people? If you've never heard of the American Slave Code, I'm reading it to you right now. We are the only group of people in the history of civilization who was forbidden to read and to write. And if you were caught reading or writing, you were whipped. Corporal punishment was issued upon us. Okay? Again, you can read all the 10 Commandments you want, the Torahs, and they're good. I read them too. But I'm dealing with some stuff that was applicable to the greatest Holocaust in the history of the world that was not filmed. The native African American, and we are the children of chattel slavery. We are the descendants of slaves. Our forefathers, our grandparents suffered the greatest Holocaust in the history of the world that was not filmed. I keep saying was not filmed because everybody talks about the Jewish Holocaust. You know why? Because it was filmed. Ours wasn't filmed. And when it's not on film, it's kind of hard to believe. But I thank God, or Yeshua, or Elohim, or Jesus, or Jehovah, or whatever you want to call him, the Mahdi. I thank him for cameras, cell phones. Because every time they come at us now, we taking pictures, we filming. So now the world is seeing the atrocities that was perpetrated upon our ancestors, because they're still doing it today. And that's why I'm reading this book. The American Slave Code, in theory and in practice. Required reading for every American, black, white, Asian, Latino, and from the African diaspora. What your teacher and what history didn't tell you or show you. Let me keep reading. In Georgia, by an act of 1829, no person is permitted to teach a slave, Negro, or free person of color to read or write. So in Virginia, yes, Dr. Joy DeGroyer, post-traumatic, yes, we suffer. I want to stop playing. I'm going to get back with that. I'm going to deal with that too. So in Virginia, by statute in 1830, meetings of free Negroes to learn reading and writing are unlawful and subject them to corporal punishment. And it is unlawful for white persons to assemble with free Negroes or slaves to teach them to write or read. Okay? They are prohibited. The acts of the legislature of Alabama passed in the session of 1831-2 relative to instructions to be given to the slave or free colored population, or exhortation or preaching to them, or any mischievous influence attempted to be exerted over them, is sufficiently penal. Laws of similar import are presumed to exist in the other slave-holding states. But in Louisiana, the law is armed with tenfold severity. So in Louisiana, it was tenfold the severity of punishment you would get if you was teaching your slave to read or to write. Tenfold. It not only forbids any person teaching slaves to read or write, but it declares that any person using language in any public discourse, from the bar, bench, stage, or pulpit, or in any other place, or in any private conversation, or making use of any signs or actions having a tendency to produce discontent among the free colored population, or insubordination among the slaves, or who shall be knowingly instrumental in bringing into the slave state any paper, book, or pamphlet having the like tendency, shall on conviction be punished with imprisonment or death at the discretion of the court. Oh my God. The tears are rolling off this paper, this book. You know, sometimes we do things out of ignorance because we don't know no better, because we don't have an explanation for why we do what we do. And these shootings in the street in the 21st century are a direct connection with the slave codes. When they don't see you as human, they see you as chattel. And chattel needs to be what? Put down. If we were saw as human, you would deal with us as humans. But when they see you as chattel, they put you down. We are the descendants of chattel slavery. Can I read it again? Can I read it again? The act of the legislature of Alabama passed in the secession of 1812. That's about 300 years ago, 1812. Relative to instructions to be given to the slave or free colored population, or exhortation, or preaching to them, or any mischievous influence attempted to be exerted over them, is sufficiently penal. Laws of similar imports are presumed to exist in other slave states, but in Louisiana, the law is armed with tenfold severity. It not only forbids any person teaching slaves to read or write, but it declares that any persons using language in public, if you're talking like you know what you're talking about in public, any public discourse, from the bar, if you in court and you sound intelligent, from the bench, the stage, the pulpit, or any other place, or in any private conversation, or making use of any signs or actions having a tendency to produce discontent among the free colored population, or insubordination among the slaves, or who shall be knowingly instrumental in the bringing into the state any paper. If you bought any paper, any book, any pamphlet having the like tendency, shall on conviction you will be punished with imprisonment or death at the discretion of the court. And this is Kent's Commentary, Volume 2, Part 5, page 268. Man, Louisiana wasn't playing. And these are the laws, people, that are still on the books. but the laws of the books are still written in their hearts. Watch this. Bible societies do not distribute the Bible among slaves. Let me say this again. Bible societies do not distribute Bible among slaves because it is prohibited and because the slaves are unable to read. John Woolman of New Jersey, 1757 said, some of our society friends, and some of the society called New Lights use some endeavors to instruct those slaves they have in reading. But in common, this is not only neglected, but disapproved. That's in the Journal of Life, Woolman, page 74. Okay? Watch this. In the House of Delegates of Virginia in 1832, Mr. Berry said this, we have, as far as possible, closed every avenue by which light may enter their minds. Let me say this again. In the House of Delegates of Virginia in 1832, Mr. Berry said, we have, as far as possible, closed every avenue by which light may enter their minds. The slave minds. Let me stop right there. You may have closed every avenue of light by the books, my brother. But see, we're sons of God. We are some people. So you closing all your books, we still getting light from the sun. Still getting energy. Still getting information. We've been some people all our lives. Close the books. We still rise. Still we rise. Still we rise. Okay? Let me keep reading. Mr. Berry. Okay. In the House of Delegates in 1832, Mr. Berry said, we have as far as possible closed every avenue by which light may enter the slaves' minds. If we could extinguish the capacity to see the light, our work would be completed. This is what Mr. Berry said. If we could extinguish the capacity to see the light, our work would be completed. They would then be on a level with the beasts of the field, and we should be safe. I am not certain that we would do it if we could find out the process that on the plea of necessity. Wow. This man, Mr. Berry, said, if we could extinguish the capacity to see the light, our work would be completed. If we just keep black people from seeing the light, from reading, from writing, we would keep them on the level of beasts in the field. Let me stop right there. Because I made a video earlier, and I said to you earlier, what separates man from beast is the knowledge of God. Because if a man don't have the knowledge of God, he will act like a beast. Because a beast don't have convictions. All a beast of the field see is prey and predator. Either you're a prey or you're a predator. And so for this Mr. Berry to say we can keep him as a beast if we don't give him the light, he was onto something. The light of the written word, but they forget we are children of the light. We get light from the sun. That's why I tell people all the time, go outside and take in the sun rays. Get your vitamin D from the sun, not from the vitamin, not from the milk. Family, 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 family. These mutations, God particle in us, wouldn't allow it to happen. That vibratum you talked about in that vibratum they talked about in Black Panther. That's us, the vibratum, that God particle. Oh my God. As I read it, I don't, my God, all I'm saying. I'm gonna read this again. If we could extinguish the capacity for them to see the light. I'm back. Wow. I'm having some difficulty with the connection. I may have to bring it to a close because again I'm in the country, and I don't have. The connection's not good, but I may have to wrap it up. But I want to just get that. They want to keep us on the level of a beast, people, family, of a beast, and they was concerned about their safety. Okay, let me read this. Kentucky is one of the few slave states, perhaps the only one except Maryland, where I live. Kentucky is one of the few slave states, perhaps except for Maryland, in which slave education is not expressly prohibited. But they can need you to come back. Family, I keep going out. So I'm going to wrap it up for right now. And I may come back on my laptop because I'm using my phone right now. And it keeps going out. It keeps going out. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I'm going to upload this. I'm going to title this Education Prohibited. I'm going to end this broadcast, family. Remember this. It is not how much you know. It's how much you care.